We have been noting a number of major anniversary dates this year, and one of them is for this company. It was 100 years ago yesterday, on July 13th, 1925, when WCSH Radio went on the air as the first commercial radio station in Maine. The station grew and prospered, and that led in time to TV and the two main stations we now know as News Center Maine. It's a pretty good story, and 207's Don Kerrigan is here to tell it.
It is a pretty good story. You know, radio changed Maine, changed everything, changed the world, really. And radio really started to take off and grow in the early 1920s. Now, there were multiple experimental stations that came about then. WABI in Bangor started, licensed, but as a religious station. So WCSH Radio was the first licensed commercial radio station in Maine. And it turns out, we learned, that it started to help another business. 100 years ago in southern Maine, radio looked a bit like this, only simpler. And if you turned it on, you might well have heard nothing. Until July 13, 1925. WCSH Radio, the first licensed commercial station in Maine, had hit the air.
It's one of the events, the first commercial radio station in southern Maine, that marks the difference between that world and ours.
Historian Herb Adams says radio changed everything.
It's the dawn of the era of instant communication.
You have to realize how important Congress Square is to the family.
These two guys would agree.
What must that moment have been like to flip the big switch and turn that on?
I think it was probably magic, absolute magic.
Brothers Fred and Nat Thompson are forever linked to that moment. Their grandfather, Henry Rines, was the man who started WCSH Radio on the top floor of his Congress Square Hotel.
CSH stands for Congress Square Hotel, which a lot of people aren't aware of.
At the time, Henry Rines was building another hotel next door, a big one, to be called the Eastland.
Why he decided to start a radio station?
Well, he was very worried about the fact that he had just was in the process of building the Eastland Hotel in 1925, which opened in 1927. But he wanted to make sure that the entire community knew about the opening of the hotel.
Back then, it was all the trains had stopped here, and people were coming into the hotel by train before they would go up to Rangeley and go up to Northeast Harbor or wherever they were headed. But then with the advent of the automobile, he felt that if he put a radio antenna on top of his hotel and was able to promote his hotel to people who were driving, they'd be more likely to stop here in Portland still.
Those towers, built right on top of the Congress Square Hotel, held the first radio antenna.
You look at that picture, you'll see that that was, 75, 80 feet above this building.
The hotel had a dining room on the 6th floor, and it was here, in this same room with the same mosaic tile, that Henry Rines built his radio station.
And apparently you'd have on one side of a wall, you'd have diners, and they could actually see the radio being broadcast on the other side of a small wall.
And they made it look a bit classy.
Well, I think that the sound quality came in when they draped the whole place with large curtains that extended down from the ceiling. So that was for sound purposes. They just blocked off all these windows.
Every program was live back then, no records or tape yet. Bands, comedians, everything live and local.
And of course, 1925, not many people around here had radios yet.
Not many people had radios.
Those who did heard this new signal, and word began to spread.
And that they were encouraging people who heard the broadcast to send them telegrams so they would know how far it went. And the next day, they were receiving telegrams from New York City, from Philadelphia, from Hartford, Connecticut, and from Toronto, Canada.
Really?
The air was clear and free. There were no competitors.
But radio was growing and more stations were coming. A year and a half later, the NBC Radio Network formed and WCSH joined, bringing the world into Maine living rooms. And that world included this piece of history.
Well, these are the original NBC chimes.
Sounding those 3 notes to signal a program change. The notes every radio and eventually TV listener knew by heart.
There is none other in the world like them.
Do we have something to ding those with? Do you remember how it goes?
I think I do.
One needs a little tweaking there, I think.
Tweaking, yes. Yes, that one needs a little tweaking.
The rest really is broadcast history. Radio united the United States in a way they had never been.
Well, I think one good example of that is Lindbergh actually came to Portland just after he had flown to, across the Atlantic. And he spoke on WCSH Radio, but he flew his plane right into Old Orchard Beach initially and then landed in Scarborough. And then they had him come here and speak. And, here he is live, the person who crossed the Atlantic for the first time. A world hero who was coming into their living rooms from Portland, Maine.
We take that kind of thing for granted today.
So it was a huge undertaking, in a way unequivalent with the invention of the telegraph or photography or the internet.
But in that world of the 1920s, radio was and remained a kind of magic.
It did, and I honestly think that's one of the things that attracted me to work in it. Back in the day, you and I both got our start in different ways from these radio stations. I had my first paying job at WLBZ Radio in Bangor, and you?
At WYNZ Radio, which was what WCSH became.
Yep.
And so the links are there.
Yep, sure are. Happy anniversary.
Yeah, 100 years. Thanks, Don. Stay with us. We'll be right back.